Mm-hmm.
which I didn't know that happens to people.
Okay. So my first couple of questions are a little before you were even born.
Okay.
Just what you know about your mom and dad. So you were talking about how your mom became a teacher. Would you tell me a little about that?
Yes, she was one of six children. They lived in Maryland, and they lived on a little river in Maryland. And she decided she wanted to be a school teacher. Uh, her other sisters, none of them became school teachers, and she had she only had 11 grades in high school, and then they had a 2 year what was called a normal school, and that school's still in Maryland, and they still use it. Um, and so when she graduated, she had a schoolroom from the first grade to the sixth grade, all in one room. But I never did ask her how many children were in that. But she told me some things about that, and one was that uh, there was two brothers that were farmers. Their mom and dad were farmers, and when they did not need them on the farm, they would send them to school, and they were about my mother's age. The boys were, and she was only 21 at the time. So, but anyway, she didn't tell me too much about it, but I thought that was very interesting. And my father uh, did mostly farming for other people, worked for other people. But then he got a chance to get a job in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania, and that was when they started industrializing that part of Pennsylvania on the Delaware River. So mom and dad bought a house there and had it for many, many years. Well, up until mom died, and they raised all five of us kids. I think three of us were born in that house. But other than that, can't tell you much more about mom and dad, except they lived there all that time. Uh, I probably could tell you about. I was telling Haley about how we heated the house. We heated it with a furnace by coal, and that was very interesting. If you didn't keep the coal on the in the furnace on the fire, then you wouldn't have heat, and it got very cold there in the winter. But I think that's kind of all I can think of, unless you can think of something else. It was a very little house.
Did they ever tell you anything about the Depression?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That was hard for everybody, and I myself don't know how to explain it. I just always read about it and heard about it, and I was too young to actually know I was in the depression, and it was hard on everybody. But my father managed to keep his job during that, but there was no raises in pay or anything like that. They had very little money, just enough to eat and pay the rent. Actually, they bought their house, the house payment, and it wasn't much. I mean, I don't think I think they paid $1,200 for that house, which was a lot of money then.
Hey. Okay, now I'm just gonna ask you a couple of questions about when you were young and when you were growing up in Pennsylvania. So, just out of curiosity, what year were you born?
1927,
1927? And what part of Pennsylvania did you live?
the southeastern part. It was only about 5 or 6 miles from the Delaware borderline, Pennsylvania Delaware borderline. And it's funny because Delaware didn't have any taxes because of the DuPonts. You can look it up. The DuPonts were very rich people, and they paid the taxes even up until my sister lived in Delaware, and because of the DuPonts, she did not have to pay for her medicine. The DuPonts paid for the elderly's medicine, and not that. But anyway, let me think. There was something that came in my mind about that. Well, it was about the taxes, which when she told me, I thought, oh, that's wonderful, you know.
So you were the youngest of five siblings, correct?
I was the youngest of five, and that's what I just thought of. I was born the 26th of September, and that's when it begins to get cold in Pennsylvania. And when that's fall, and that's when winter is becoming soon. And I always thought to myself, boy, my mother must have really been happy when she found out that I was going to be born, because that meant three of we children were in diapers. Now she had to wash the diapers every day. And I know because when my children were born, I had to hand wash them too. But, and then take them outside and hang them on the line, hang every diaper on the line. And then when it got cold, the diapers actually froze when you hung them up. And then usually the breeze would thaw them out, and then they had to dry. But can you imagine the diapers that she had to hang out? And our place had steps, so she had to go up and down the steps. When she did the real laundry, once a week, everybody did their laundry on Monday for some reason, and her washing machine was in the cellar. So that meant somewhere or another, those five kids were upstairs without my mother being up there with them. And that meant, and her washer, it had two rinses, and it had some kind of rollers. Some of you can look it up maybe and see them on your computer nowadays. But anyway, when I think of how hard it was on her and people like her, because she had to throw the clothes for seven people, some way or another, get that done. And I always thought, I wonder what these kids were doing upstairs while my mother was in the cellar doing the laundry. So,
Could you tell me about your siblings, their
so
names, what they
yeah,
were like?
my oldest is Anna. Anna, it's Anna, Dorothy, Thelma, Samuel, and Carolyn. That's me. Anna graduated from high school and on a Friday, and she got married on Saturday. And we thought that was pretty cool. My sister Dorothy, I don't think Dorothy graduated. I don't remember her graduating. But then Thelma graduated and then went right into nursing school. And besides that, Thelma was a redhead. And besides that, she had natural curly hair, which we thought was really cool. But she had beautiful red hair. And then my brother Samuel. Samuel was a boy, and I was born soon after him. And I was right with Samuel. Wherever Sam was, I was. If he was in trouble, I was in trouble. And so we had a really, really happy home life. Not everybody can say that, so I really think that was a blessing too. My father always worked. He never drank. I started to say he never smoked, but for some reason, when we would go on the trip, we always had a car, an old car, but it was the cleanest one in town. My father loved his cars. And when we would go on the trip to Maryland to visit our relatives, for some reason, Daddy would have a cigar, and he would smoke that cigar the whole trip. We didn't know it was doing any problem to our health, but that's about all I can say, except we had a really nice, happy life. I know my mother did not have a, and my mother died at 52. She had a heart attack and died at 52 years old. So,
Can you tell me what it was like growing up in Pennsylvania? What did you guys do for fun? And did you have to work?
um, I always seemed to work somewhere or another. There was always something for me to do, but it was fun. It was fun in Pennsylvania. Where I lived, we could walk what we called down to the creek. So we had a creek, but we called it a crick. And I know that's not the proper, that was our way of saying creek was a crick. Um, it was just maybe a block or two from our home. So we would go there. We had a swimming hole down there. Um, it would end up dirty and muddy, but it was a swimming hole. You could actually dive into it, and it was lovely. It was wonderful. And then in the wintertime, down that same hill, when it snowed, we had sleds, and we could leave on the road on the snow on our sled from our house and go straight down. And the creek had frozen, and so we could go. We made it. We kids made it so we'd have a pathway to go across the creek, and a good bit after we crossed the creek, we could still go on the sled. The only trouble is you had to walk all the way back up again to do it again. But it was really a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Mm.
And so in the winter we snow, sledded a lot. Very cold. We walked to school, probably a mile. I never did see how far it was, but at least a mile. Walked to school every day, and I did have many uh, perfect years, never missing a day of going to school. So, but we just thought that was normal. You just go every day, whether it snowed or not, unless it was horrible. And some way or another that we'd know we don't go today. It's too bad. So, um, I know we did lots of other things, and we went to the movies. That we walked at least a mile or two to go to the movies, and on Saturdays it was a double feature, and it was I do believe it was 10 whole cents. I kind of think when I was real young, I think it was only a nickel, but I can remember it being 10 cents to go to see a double feature, and my mom would let my brother and I go. I'm sure she looked forward to Saturday afternoon, for sure. Um, I was telling Haley that our home was adjoining a grocery store, a mom and pop grocery store. They had fresh fruit and vegetables and a meat counter, fresh meat. Um, we could get almost anything there, but it was a really little store. So my brother and I learned you had to go up several steps to get into the store. And we learned that if we went under the steps, we found money. And almost every Saturday morning, we would go under those steps, he and I. We didn't tell anybody about it. And we would actually find a quarter sometimes. What it was is when people would put their change away after buying their groceries, and they would drop. A couple times we found 50 cents. 50, that was a lot of money. But we always found the money to go to the movies that day. And then he and I would walk to the movies. And sometimes in the winter, it would be beginning to get dark when he and I got out of the afternoon movie. And I know that I remember several times that he would run way far ahead of me and hide in an alley. And then I would be screaming and crying and telling him I was going to tell mom on him. And then he would jump out of the alley and scare me when I got was going by. I can remember that happening. And I also remember Daddy getting him a bicycle. My father traded for things. Well, he traded something and got a bicycle for my brother, a boy's bike. And my brother wouldn't give me a ride on it. I can remember screaming and crying to my mom, and she finally told him to give me a ride on that bike. And so he did. But I sat on the bar, and every time his knee would come up as he was pedaling, his knee would come up under my butt and lift my whole body. And I was telling him, I'm going to tell mom on you. I'm going to tell mom on you. And then all of a sudden it got really funny. And he and I got to laugh about it. It was a big joke. We never forgot it. I don't know if that's important, but I mean, that's just some of the things we did. So we went swimming in the summer, sledding in the winter, and it was a lot of row houses, and we had lots of friends and neighbors, lots and lots. And most all of us were very poor, but we didn't know it. We were very happy. So, is that enough?
Would you tell me the story about the watermelons again?
Oh, we didn't realize it was stealing. And when I talk about it, I think that was stealing. But when we went to Maryland, and sometimes I'd spend a lot of my summer in Maryland with relatives, and my brother would too. And the watermelons, the farmers grew their watermelons in the cornfields. I guess to save space, but I'm not sure. All I know is they grew watermelons in the cornfields. So several of us kids went into the cornfield and we all got a watermelon. So we were in there laughing and playing, and the farmer yelled out, "Hey, you kids, get out of my watermelon. Get out of there right now. Go home. Get away from there. Don't take my watermelons." So, but we each took a watermelon and ran, scared because he shot his shotgun up in the air to scare us. I'll never forget it. And, but anyway, we took those watermelons home. But now, as I'm talking about it, I realize we were stealing. We didn't think we were stealing. There was thousands of watermelons in there. But that was one of my little exciting times.
Alright.
I'll let you start.
Okay, so
See what else we.
my next question is, how did you meet the man who became your husband, Warren?
Oh, well, like I said, it was a little town. Actually, they called it a borough, I think. Bourough. Did you ever hear of a borough?
No.
Towns were separated into boroughs. Had something to do with putting streets in. Our street um, was not a dirt. What would you call a dirt road? They they made our street out of crushed up coal and coke. Not the kind of coke you guys are thinking about. um, COKE, I think it is. We can look it up. But it has to do with, and you know, COAL. And they still use coal for a lot of things, don't they? Yeah. But anyway, our street, evidently they ground it up someplace and then they would lay it on our dirt. And we ended up with these black, ugly streets that wasn't cement. That that's the kind of streets we had. I know that I fell down more than once. We played in the streets, and so to this day I still have a black mark across my knee, where that coke is still in my knee. nobody ever bothered about it, and it never hurt me. So, but these little boroughs, they had to pay their own bills and everything. I never did really understand how it all worked. But I forgot your question already.
So my question was, how did you meet
Oh,
the
yeah.
man who
So, what
became
I
your
started to
husband?
say was all these little streets in this little town or village, whatever you want to call it, and we lived really close to each other. And we all went to the same schools. And but he was 4 years older than I was, and he was in school with my sister Thelma, in the same class as my sister Thelma. But once this war business started cropping up, and they started talking about war, um, then the men and boys, like the teenagers, were starting to think about having to go into the service. And all I know is I met him at school, and also met him be on this corner where the corner grocery store was. There was a street light, and I think it was the only street light for a whole block. And the the young people would meet in front of the grocery store under the street light, even at night, and it was fun. You got to know everybody. So I would say that's the way I got to meet him. And really, we didn't bother that much. He had a couple girlfriends, and so I thought, oh, shoot, I can get him if I want. And so I started making eyes at him, and and I guess the rest just kind of happened. Is
Um,
that an answer?
that's a good answer. So, what drove you guys to get married, and how
Oh,
did you guys
yeah.
do it?
Well, what it was is, I think from me being the youngest girl of four girls, there wasn't much of anything I didn't know that I didn't have to know about boys and girls and so forth. And I stuck with my older sisters a lot, stuck with my brother a lot. He watched over me, but I really had fun when the girls would let me go with them. So I knew I had a lot of knowledge about life, and we just, whenever they would talk about going in the service and going to war and so forth, well, when finally my husband was going to sign, he wanted to sign for the Navy. He didn't want to go in the Army, and so he signed up for the Navy. So we decided we're in love, and you're going to war, and you might get killed. Let's get married. We'll get married and have children. And we got married. We fell in love. We got married, and and had children, but not right away. I was telling Haley yesterday. Did you want me to tell about trying to keep on going to school,
Yeah,
or no?
first, would you say how old you were when you got married?
Oh, I was 15. I hadn't turned 16 yet. I turned 16 four days later. I turned 16 4 days later, and there was a place in Maryland that we could get on the train and go to Maryland, and you didn't have to be uh, a certain age, and you didn't have to have parents with you or anything. You just went to. I started to say the name. It'll come. Anyway, we got a train and went to Maryland and just got married. A preacher and his wife was the witness, and and then we stopped at City Hall and got everything legal that we needed, and it was just no problem. And nowadays, it would probably be a big problem.
So, you tried to keep it secret at first?
Yes.
How did that come out?
Well, my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, was already in the service, and he was in a naval base in New Jersey, and they got the Philadelphia newspaper, and the Philadelphia newspaper put all of the weddings, not weddings, the marriages in the newspaper. They listed them, and so he read them. We wondered why, but a young man would be reading the marriages, but he did. He married, and he called his mother and he said, "Why didn't you tell me Carolyn and Warren got married? We were going to keep it secret. I was going to keep on going to school, and I had a job also, and just keep on doing that until we thought it was the right time." But that didn't work out at all. So I did go to school and asked my principal to allow me to go to school, but he thought that was the most unheard of thing he ever heard in his life. He refused to let me go to school. And I explained to him I wasn't pregnant. There was no reason for me not to go to school. I guess he thought I would taint the other students. I never did know what that was all about. But I got a job at the Ford plant working on tanks, helping to build tanks. I really didn't build any. My job was not to build them, but it had to do with getting the tanks out to the servicemen. So
You mentioned that you took care of your mother during that
yes,
time.
my
What was
mother
that
had
about?
yes, my mother had a bad heart, and I was the only child left home. My brother went in the Navy, so he was in the service also. Um, my husband's my husband had two brothers in the Navy, and he had one nephew that was exactly the same age as him. He was in the Navy also, so we had quite a lot of servicemen in our family, especially before the war was over. A lot of them.
My next question is, where were you? Do you remember when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, I remember that for sure. I used to babysit for my oldest sister. She had a son and a baby, and I used to babysit for them on Saturday nights. Well, I would stay with them every weekend, and I was in her kitchen, and we liked to listen to the music then. We had the radio on, and I thought I was dreaming. I didn't think I was hearing what I heard. That that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was it makes a mark in your heart that you just don't forget it. And it was the beginning of a whole new life for everybody, everybody. So it was a Sunday morning at my sister's house.
Um, do you remember how many people from like your town, your school, your street went to war?
Went where?
Went to the war?
That would be hard to tell, but up in Phoenix, my sister's house, no, I might have them in my shed, so remind me to get them for you. I have newspapers, and the newspapers would always mention who was leaving that day for the service, who was leaving. And then of course we had many that died in that we went to school with. Um, my very first boyfriend ever was killed in at Iwo Jima. He was in the Marines, and you just don't think things like that are possible. But we lost a lot of our friends in that war. So some of our neighbors, it was hard. It was different. Mm-hmm.
Would you tell me what your husband wore and did in the war?
He was he went on a minesweeper in the Navy, and he had to go to school, and they had a mine warfare school in Virginia. So he was sent first to Rhode Island, to Newport, Rhode Island, and that had to do with the Navy and learning to be a sailor. And then they sent him to the mine warfare school, and I do believe he was there about a year uh, to learn how. And then he was on this ship, his ship. It was called the USS Requisite, and he was on that exact same ship from the time it was christened until the war was over, till the day the war was over. And then he found his own way home. He was a signal man on the bridge with the officers, and so he was sending signals,
How did he do that?
and they were by lights, and I do not know the name of what they call sending the signals by the lights. He also sent signals by flags, signal flags. So he got in touch with other ships until he found a ship that was heading toward the United States, and he got his captain gave him all his papers that he needed to leave his ship and head home. And so his main thing right then was finding ships that were heading home. And that was a very interesting thing. He found a destroyer that was heading, I guess you would say east, I don't know, because this was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So he had been on that ship the whole war and managed to stay alive. Um, I don't know. Do you want to know what that ship did? What they did? What that ship did? Or
I don't know. Could you just tell me how he got home?
and he got the destroyer first, and then he got to one of the islands. I don't know which island. We didn't talk much about it. He was home a couple of years before he even told me about it. How he got home, um, because it was thousands and thousands of men wanting to get home all at once, and we didn't have computers then. But he got a destroyer first, and they left him off on an island, and then he was able to find a place that would allow him to send signals to other ships, and he finally found a troop ship that was on its way to the United States. So he hung out until that troop ship. They gave him permission to go home on it. So that was interesting. It took a long time. I can't remember, uh, several months before he actually arrived home. Arrived home. So
Um, would you tell me about the few times you got to see your husband while he was still active in the Navy?
one time his ship came in. His ship came into Oakland, California, for some repairs, and he got 7 days off. But we lived in Pennsylvania, so there was no way. We had to do travel by trains or car, and there's no way you could make it back to Pennsylvania and back in 7 days. So I decided that I would go to California. So I went to California on the train, and I told Haley yesterday about the one train car, that was for servicemen's wives and children only. And it was a big car, but it was seats only. There was no beds or anything. And So I'm sure it had at least 100 of us with the children and everything. And a lot of them were in diapers. Didn't have throwaway diapers then. So we had the material diapers, and we had to keep them clean. So we worked out a way where we could wash them in the little bathroom and hang them up. And so we had diapers hanging all over the whole car. It was very interesting. I don't really know how to explain it, except you can picture we all were sitting up. Sometimes we get desperate and lay down in the aisles just to lay down for a while. But
How
it,
long was that trip?
and that was 4 days, 5 days and 4 nights, I think. I might have it backwards, but it was a 5 day trip. So
You planned your first child? Would you tell me
we
about that?
planned our first child. We planned our first child when it was time for him to actually leave on the ship, and we decided, oh, we're going to have a boy. I mean, just in case you might get killed, and we'll have a son. Well, we ended up having 3 daughters. And then the next time his ship came in, it didn't come in. I mean, he came home. So his ship only came back stateside once. And it did stay a couple months, 3 or 4 months. And that's the first time he saw his daughter was was when the ship came in.
And you had two children during the war?
Two during the war, and then one after the war.
Um, would you tell me about the times that your husband met people from his
Oh
hometown?
yeah, that was. It's a small world. We found out it's a small world. The one time that, like I said, Bancy was a quartermaster on on the bridge, what they call the bridge, with the officers. Well, he could signal. He had to have permission, but he signaled. He sought out my brother's ship, which was a destroyer escort, and he sent signals to their bridge and made arrangements to get to go visit my brother's ship. And by doing that, they had to use the little boat. And I don't know the little boat's name. What would you call it?
A rowboat?
There's a little.
A rowboat?
No, it wasn't a rowboat. It had a motor, but it's a little boat that they could lower. And I cannot.
Lifeboat?
It wasn't really a lifeboat, but it was to go back and forth if they had to go to land, to pick up people. I might think of it later, but anyway, it was a motorboat. And so he was given permission to go from his ship to my brother's ship, and they got to visit with each other. And my brother had pictures of our daughter. My husband had not received his mail yet to receive the pictures of his daughter, so he was able to see the pictures of his first daughter. And he and my brother were great friends anyway. They had gone to school together, so they enjoyed visiting with each other. During a war in the middle of an ocean, it was kind of cool, where everybody thought. And then there was another time that he was on another ship for some reason, and it was a troop ship of some sort. It was not a troop ship. I'm sorry. It brought groceries and everything to the ships. It delivered what they needed to the ships. I know there was a name for that too, but anyway, he saw one of our hometown newspapers on that ship. So he inquired who owned that newspaper, and it was a friend of his from the little town, one of the little towns near where we lived. And we thought that was pretty cool too, in the middle of the ocean. I don't know how many ships were in a fleet. I should know, but I don't. But the minesweepers that he was on went in before a major battle. They had to go in and clean out the rivers and bays and ocean around the islands that were going to be attacked, like Iwo Jima, Okinawa, all of the major battles in the Pacific. That fleet, they had to sweep the mines before the fleet could go in. And there's a morbid thing to it too. When the little minesweepers, once they swept the waters, they would go out around and behind the fleet, and the fleet would drop off the soldiers and marines and so forth for the battle. And then our little minesweepers, when the battles were all over, like days later, they had to go back in where they swept the mines. And they had big things like tree trimmers that the bodies that were floating from the battles, they had to get the dog tags off of the bodies. And that was one of their jobs. And and he was home probably 5 years or so before he ever told me about that job that they did. So there was things that probably we'll never know what went on. And one other thing too, a lot of the people in the villages on the islands helped our people stay alive. They helped them a lot. Um, I mean, you could probably read about it in history, but these things went on that the average person didn't know about. So I don't know if I answered that question.
It was all very interesting, Grandma. Okay, so where did you live during the war?
I lived at my mother and father's house, and I worked up until it was time to have the baby. Time to have baby then, and then I kept the house for my mom. She did get a job then though. She wasn't well, but she would walk a couple miles to her job, and it was in a hardware store. And it was wonderful for me to see her working because she loved it, just loved it. She could get to see all the people in town, and I never dreamed of my mother working in a hardware store, and she loved it.
What did your father do during the war?
My father worked, well, during the war, he worked in the same plant, factory, as he worked before the war. And before the war, they made material company, rayon. And before that, it was called a viscose company, Viscose. And I do believe viscose, way back when, was a form of material. And so he was a spinner, and making material. So during the war, they made parachutes naturally, and and we were right on the Delaware River, and so the ships all come in the Delaware River. The ships and lots of railroads there, lots and lots of railroads. Um, anyway, I lived with my mother and father. Very happy time as far as our home life. And then they helped me with the children as I had children. But I always kept the house. Mom did most of the cooking, but then she got very sick and couldn't do that stuff.
Other
So,
than working in a company that built tanks, was there anything else you did to support the war effort?
yeah, after I had children, I worked in a submarine sandwich store. We didn't call it a restaurant. It was a shop, a submarine sandwich shop, and it's close to Philadelphia. So it's one of the first shops that ever made subs. And so I went to work about 6 in the evening, and it finished at 11. And my mom and dad kept kept my children. Um, we made so many sandwiches that we laid them out on a counter, probably 20 at a time. And there was four of us, and we would just keep making them like an assembly line, making sandwiches. And we made Philly steaks, best Philly steaks in the whole wide world. And sometimes I worked like all day Saturday. Another thing that was kind of cute is movies were so important then. And we walked every place, walked from where we lived to the movies, a couple miles. Uh, when the movies would let out, boy, we had to have lots of sandwiches already made. Well, people want different things on their sandwiches. So we had to set some of them. We knew the people would be coming in, and we'd have them ready. But those Philadelphia cheesesteaks went like crazy. So we had to have somebody just making that, and then we were always making the submarines.
Um, Now I'm gonna ask you about after the war.
Hmm.
Was it strange because your marriage like had started when he was going off to war and you only saw him twice? Was it strange being together again after the war?
Somewhere or another, we kept. This sounds dumb, but I wrote every single day. Now I don't know what I had to write about every single day, but that was the important thing, was keeping those letters. And on ships, he would get like 20 letters or 30 letters at a time, and then he would arrange them according to the date, and it would give him something to keep up on what was going on. So when he got home, it was so unreal that that person was home, alive and well, after these years, you know, of this going on. And I myself, being a Christian and just trusting in the Lord, I never had a doubt that he wasn't coming home. And but we never really thought about the seriousness of where in heaven's name are we going to live. I mean, you can't live with somebody else all that time. You can't put up with each other, you know. But we it worked out great for us. But we both were really bright and really hard workers, and so that helped us a lot. We did buy a very old. I think the house was probably 200 years old. A fixer upper. It had been a farmhouse, and it was adjoining too, two of us, and these people had lived in theirs forever, and ours had not been tended to. Anyway, we bought it, $1,200, and we started fixing up right away. So we fixed it up modern, really nice, and very hard work, because he was working hard anyway, and I still worked at the sandwich shop after he come home. He would take care of the children in the afternoon, and I would work at the sandwich shop. So, and I do remember one thing. He told me about a washing machine on his ship, and you would throw the clothes in, and it would come out all washed and rinsed, but not quite dry. And I couldn't picture what he was talking about. And I said, I want one of those things. And so the very first thing we ever got was an automatic washing machine for me. I didn't want one of those roller things where you had, like I said, I don't know if it'll show you on the computer what they are, but those old fashioned machines, you're talking about hard work. So, anyway, I got an automatic washer, but I never got an automatic dryer until my family was all married and gone. But
Was there any aid for the soldiers coming home that you remember from the government?
Yes, yes, to go for education, education, and it was called the GI Bill, the GI Bill of Rights, and they had a lot of rights. They did. As the education I can remember for sure, and I have to be honest, I don't remember the rest of the rights. I was too busy. We were too busy just taking care of ourselves and our family, making a living. But I do know that my husband did go to school. He did go to school. He did use some of the rights, which was wonderful.
Um, so, what job did your husband eventually find?
Okay, his father had taught him to be a sign painter. So even when he was on the ship, he was able to make all the signs of go this way, go that way. I mean, it wasn't a job. He just did it because he was a sign painter and they needed a sign for something. But when he was in school, he got like a little side job when when he didn't have to be in school, and would paint signs for the little towns or cities where he was going to school. And he enjoyed that a lot and met a lot of people doing that. So when he got out of the service, he would paint signs, and his father had taught him how to um, paint houses. So he was a house painter. There's, I mean, there's such a thing as a regular painter that knows the paint and how to mix it and what how to put it on and paper hanger. Then we had wallpaper on the walls. I think every house had wallpaper. Do you know what I'm talking about? And anyway, and he was wallpaper really, really good. I tried to help him, um, but I was so slow because I didn't know what I was doing that he'd say, "That's okay, honey, I'll do it. you you go take care of the kids," because there was a way of doing it. There was a certain table, certain paste, certain brushes that you had to know what you're doing to do it right and line it up right on the wall. So he made a living wallpaper painting and sign painting, and people wanted him because he was good.
So, did your brother survive the war too?
My brother, all my family survived. All of our family survived. And when my brother got out, he had a hard time finding a job because he didn't have a father that could train him like my husband did. Um, but he finally did get a decent job and made out well. But to begin with, he was an automobile mechanic. He was a machinist mate on the ship, and that helped him become an automobile mechanic. And so he could put food on the table.
Um, would you tell me about your sister Thelma? What do you know about her being a nurse?
Yes, uh, she was a nurse, and the war had just started, but she was in training. So, like, probably her third year in training, then they became a nurses' corps, and she had to wear a uniform like the sailors and soldiers did. Um, but she also wore the white uniform when she was on duty. And they sent her to a hospital in Mississippi, from Pennsylvania to Mississippi, to an army hospital. So she got to serve in an army hospital during the war. And she stayed a nurse afterwards, too. So
And would you share with me, just overall, generally, what were your thoughts on the war itself?
it's hard for me to get into that because I was always so busy working and taking care of people that were sick for some reason. But I knew what was going on, and I hated it. And Pearl Harbor Day was hard. on everybody. It was like a nightmare. It was like it was not true. And then the awful business of the young men in school, just getting out of school and leaving, and like I said, not coming back. I was aware of all that because of we had so many family members in it. But also we started hearing stories about what was happening to the Jewish people in Europe, and we couldn't believe it was happening for sure. And they were trying to hide it like it wasn't happening. But for those, for anyone that hears my voice, that was real, and those people died. They killed, I forget how many million people, a lot, and it's more than our minds can even imagine. So the overall thing was it was horrible. Nothing like it should ever happen again, ever. But it's still going on. War is horrible, just horrible. Until you've lived through it, I don't think you can imagine what it's like until you have some loved ones go. And I know that the soldiers in Europe, I didn't know too much was what was going on there because it seemed like all of our family was in the Pacific. So that was there's no other way of saying anything about it except how horrible human beings can be to another human being. Unreal.
So these questions aren't really about your personal history, but your personal opinions. Do you have any advice? I mean, you've lived a long time. Do you have any advice for anyone that you'd be willing to share? Just people in general?
We've lived through a lot. We've lived through a lot. Um, it's one thing I don't talk about much is when the fellows come back from the war, you think everything's great, and it was, and we were blessed with good health. We were really blessed with good health, but the war had already done a lot of bad things to our men and women and women. Um, we had a lot of women in the war. A lot of women drove airplanes. I don't know if anybody's aware of it. They had a Army Air Corps that was women, and and a lot of them were affected mentally when when they come back home. They had a hard time settling in and hard time making it in life. And Grandpop had a drinking problem, and everybody drank. For some reason, everybody drank more, I would think, than before. But of course, there was a World War, and we still had men that were suffering from the World War. So there was a lot of alcoholism after when the men got home, and they didn't even realize anything was wrong. And here it was; they have names for it now um, that the men suffer from. First World War, a lot of them were gassed. They used gas on them, and it affected them mentally. The Second World War, I think alcoholism was the worst thing of all. Everybody just thought it was okay to drink, and it ruined a lot of homes and lives. And so my thoughts on it was that was a shame. That was a shame, and I came from a family where they didn't drink. You just didn't drink, and so it was hard to get used to something like that you weren't used to at all. But I know, and then after everybody came home, that's when they started building houses. A lot of little houses cropped up, and my sister and her husband ended up buying one of the first little sections. And in Pennsylvania, uh, a builder, a man had good ideas, and he decided all these men are home, we need homes for them. So he started little towns, and they were modern little towns with little backyards and front yards with grass to cut. and the first one that I remember was called Levittown, and Mr. Levitt built that, and then another town would pop up, and that's how they ended up having homes. We built our own, but most people moved into these little sections of towns, like little matchboxes.
You've lived a long life. In your life, is there anything you've learned about living in general, love, parenting, that you think would be helpful for the next generation to know?
Well, of course, like I said, being a Christian, all I can think of is God is love. Love. What is love? Well, in the Bible it says God is love. So, God is love. So, what we have to do is love one another, not pick on each other, not nag at each other. And when I say pick, I mean, if you're different than somebody else, so what? I mean, God made us all, and we've all got good in us. So why don't we try to get along? Why don't we get along? Not just try. Um, and it makes life so much interesting, so happy. And look at the good things in life. And don't be thinking about always about the bad things in life and the bad people. I mean, that's what starts wars. So that's about it in a nutshell.